Now these pliers have nice, flat, smooth jaws. They've got no serrations at all. I'm fairly sure that they were bought for handling, for breaking glass, for holding glass, for snapping it open. I'm just going to have a go at this damaged edge and see if I can straighten that up. See if this back will open and shut. That's far more satisfactory. The marks that are in that aluminium there, they are there to stay, but at least the door works. We can get in and out when we want to. So, not much left on the body here. Let's have the tripod socket off the bottom. As previously mentioned, the screws in the tripod socket are often loose. In this case they weren't. The screws are also often somewhat corroded looking, and that's because cameras tend to get put down on damp concrete surfaces and wet tables and other such things, and there's often moisture at the bottom of the camera that the rest of the camera never sees. Okay, so I need the lens and shutter assembly off here next. Well, I just removed the shutter and told you all about it. Unfortunately, I hadn't started the camera, so you didn't see that bit. But it wasn't much to miss. I was just mentioning that you need a special tool typically to remove the shutter retaining ring with a retina, because there is virtually no space between the outside of the shutter and the inside of the focus mount. So you need a narrow walled tool like this to get down in there. This is the lever that connects the focus helical to the rangefinder at the top of the camera. We've got two small screws here hold this shroud in place, and that shroud guides the front half of the shaft that cocks the shutter. That shaft carries the action from the cocking rack at the back of the camera through to the front of the camera. Those two screws are chrome plated brass, quite easily damaged. I'll want to mark the position of my focus scale ring relative to the outer helical, and also mark the position of the inner and outer helical so that I know that where they're sitting at the point where those surfaces are level, that's typically where I'd mark them, which in this case is right there. I'm going to run a scribe line across there. In fact, I'm going to run two at the base of the camera and one at the top. That now I know where my focus scale ring fits on the outer helical. And I also know where the inner helical and the outer helical are in relation to each other, because it's a multi-start thread, because the lines are scribed across here where the front surfaces of those two components are level with each other. 4 black screws hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. The 4 countersunk or flathead screws hold the retaining ring in place. Take the retaining ring off and lift out the inner and outer helical together. We know the alignment of these because I've marked it. Unscrew those, they can be put aside for cleaning. I'll remove the 4 screws that held the bellows to the back of the front standard. All of this stuff is quite greasy, as you can probably see. There are 4 screws hold the lens mount onto the front standard. The focus mount, I should probably say. I'll put those aside and make sure that I don't lose anything. All of these components in here at the moment I'm putting aside for cleaning in the ultrasonic cleaner. So I'll get 1 long session through in solvent and 1 long session through in a strong domestic detergent after that to remove all traces of oil and rubbish. This business, now at the moment my bellows, yeah, they are moving away. Sometimes they're stuck to the back and you need to give them a push. Sometimes that tears up the felt washer. That's usually of no great problem to put back together. So we've got 2 screws on the top of the camera. Hold that shroud into the body. Two on the base of the camera. That shroud should slide out now. Okay, we can see that sleeve that I mentioned for the shutter release. This has been glued nicely in place with sticky grease, but if it hadn't been glued in place with sticky grease, it would drop out just like that when you lifted the shutter release shaft out. So what else have we got here? You can see the action of this finger on the side of that shroud. That piece I just showed you, the sleeve, let's find that again and show you how that fits on there. There it is. All of this stuff is very, very sticky with grease. That finger, the sleeve fits in there like that. So as the sleeve gets pushed down by the shutter release shaft, it acts on the top of this thing. And that thing in turn acts on the shutter release lever of the shutter itself. So we've got a body casting here. This is all empty. It's very, very dirty. There's a lot of grit in there, dust, some corrosion and adhesive remnants there. This piece, if we push in the button top and bottom, we can slide this right back. Now watch this, because these buttons are spring loaded. I'm catching them between finger and thumb at the top. There's the button and its return spring, and at the other end there's our button and its return spring. You don't want them to go shooting across the room, because as soon as the springs get off the table they're exceptionally hard to find. We've got a return spring here in this case. Now earlier cameras didn't have that. The earliest 3Cs and 2Cs, we'll put that to one side. There are 2 shoulder screws here. And that can all go into the cleaner. So these pieces I clean by hand. These pieces go into the ultrasonic cleaner. and then I can start putting things back together. The chrome trim plate for the top of the camera is not bad. You could do that by hand. I'll probably throw that into the final stage of the ultrasonic cleaner. And the chrome trim plate from the bottom of the camera, well, that's a bit dirtier, and I want all the remains of this adhesive and rubbish off there first. So I'll get these bits cleaned. Just getting to the end of cleaning this camera, and I noticed that the leatherette on the catch end appears to be loose on the body, so I'm going to remove that and re-glue it. It may be there's some corrosion under there. I don't usually make a point of removing the leatherette from the front of the camera because there's no need in order to, you don't need to remove it in order to access anything. And there's always a danger that the leatherette will crack if you disturb it. So it's only done when there's a need. It's stuck hard at this point here. See if I can lift that. I haven't looked under the leatherette to see what I've got, and there's certainly corrosion and failed adhesive under there. So I'd like to get this off, but I've got to get it off in one piece. I might put a few drops of naphtha on my scalpel blade, which will help to lubricate it more than anything else as I slide it underneath. It won't melt the adhesive. Here we go, that's off the front. This is corrosion. That white stuff there is corrosion. So that's probably would have accelerated and eventually the leatherette would have fallen off by itself. But I've got to get rid of all this old adhesive and any corrosion that's under there. And here I'm using the back of the scalpel blade as a scraper, and you can see that stuff just sort of shatters and comes away. So there's not much corrosion there, there was just a little bit. Now that's not uncommon with cameras, and sometimes it's quite marked on the front panels. I think you can put it down to people handling the camera with wet hands beside the pool or at the beach or wherever. They have got wet hands and they pick the camera up to use it, and that's what does it. So I'll just get the last of this old adhesive and corrosion off here, and I'll look closely at the other end. That looks okay. I'm certainly not in a hurry to open that up and get to it. I'll just clean this off. I'll clean up these leatherettes while I've got them here. What I'm doing is scraping off old adhesive here in the main. This is, of course, in the base of the camera. And I'm just using the edge of the scalpel to scrape the loose stuff off. Depends on the state of the leatherettes as to how robust you can be with your scraping. If they're very dry and fragile, you have to be much more cautious, otherwise the leatherettes can just fragment while you're scraping at them. And here I'm just wiping it down with a bit of naphtha to remove any loose stuff and any dust or any oil that's on that leatherette. Yeah, that's good. That's ready to go back on the camera. Of course, I'm not at that stage now. I'm still in the cleaning up stage. But might just as well get everything cleaned up. Alright, I'm ready to start reassembly. Well, here you can see that shutter cocking rack, and you can see that the teeth are quite damaged at this point. The tips of the teeth are sort of folded over. Possibly they can be straightened up and the rack would be useful again. I wouldn't expect to use a rack like this on a camera that I was intending to be used on a regular basis. Possibly this could be trued up, the teeth could be straightened up to the extent that it would be quite satisfactory for a camera that was intended to just sit in the cabinet and be brought out occasionally to be played with. I don't know that this would have any, I don't think there's a strong likelihood that this rack would be good in the long term under normal use. But I'll see if I can do something with it. The first thing I'll do with this is I notice that if I rub my finger across here that the edges of those teeth are raised. In other words, the metal's been pushed out to the sides. So I want to push that metal back. So I'll tap this lightly to push that metal back into line with the teeth. This side doesn't look as bad. And those are just very light taps. Now I'll try and straighten those teeth up. And here you can see I've got that rack clamped firmly in a small vise. And I'm just looking across those teeth to see what they look like. And what I'm going to do is take the tip of a screwdriver, tip this over so you can see what I'm doing, and where the teeth are pushed over, I'm pushing my screwdriver into the root of the tooth and levering across to push the tooth back over more to the vertical. I can't say I'm making any great impression on this. And I'll check that against the light and see if I've improved it at all. Well, some perhaps, but not enough. I'll have another close look at that, I think. With another round of light tapping here, I think, to put that metal back in line with the teeth is required there. One of the teeth appears slightly lower than its mates, although the gap between the teeth appears narrower, so that that tooth appears to be squashed down, if you like. There's only one tooth there that really causes me concern, I think. Perhaps that one as well. I'm looking across the top here at the tips of the teeth to see if they're all in the same plane. None of the damaged teeth appear to be sticking up, which is a good, if one of them had appeared to be high at one spot, particularly the damaged teeth, then I would want to tap it back down, push the metal back down. The object here is to try and get that metal back where it came from. The last thing you want to do is pick up a file and reshape the teeth to make them look pretty, because doing that you'll be removing metal. The last thing we want to do here would be to remove metal. Our hope is that all the metal is still present and we just need to push it back into the places it came from. So I'll just continue to work at this. Yeah, that tooth there and that tooth there. There are two teeth there that do not look particularly good. This tooth in between them looks quite good by comparison. So I've got to put this back in the vise and have another go at truing those teeth up and see how I get on. Now here I've got a rack from a Reflex 3 or 4. Now these are steel, and I don't know if they're hardened or not. They certainly have quite a tough feel to them. But what I do with this rack, by the way, is brass, the one that I'm dealing with. So what I do, once I've got the teeth back into a reasonable shape, is I place my steel rack over the top, the teeth engaged, and tap it down lightly. To help bring those teeth back into the correct profile. Let's have a look at this. This tooth here still looks damaged looking at the top, and that one there doesn't look wonderful either. So what I want to do now is just one more round of tapping that to make sure that those edges, the metal is folded back to the front, to the top edge of that thing, and hold my straight edge against it and check the height of those teeth. See if there's anything that's noticeably sitting low or sitting high. It's certainly rocking about here. That means that tooth is probably sitting slightly high. It is definitely that one there, which is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Seventh from the back end. But one tooth is sitting slightly high, so I'll just pop this back in the vise and I will tap down on that particular tooth. If I can find a punch. Make sure I'm identifying the right tooth here. It does look a little bit sharp. And I'm checking to see where my straight edge is rocking. That part's good. I've got rid of that high spot. The straight edge doesn't rock, but that damaged tooth appears to sit slightly lower, probably because it's not quite the correct shape. Its sides of it are not steep enough. I'm going to bruise that tooth up slightly into position. So what I'm going to do is position my punch at the root of that tooth and give it a tap with the hammer, which will have the effect of lifting that tooth up. The teeth are probably not the same profile all the way across the width of the metal here either, so that it looks different in profile from either side. That tooth there. Just going to give that a tap. And that'll have the effect, we're effectively squashing the metal, it's pushing it. So it's going to push out. It's got nowhere else to go but out. It's about right for height, but it's not right for shape. I'll have one more go at forming it against the teeth of this rack and see how it goes. Well, another go round with the vise and tapping and forming the teeth back into shape using that other rack as an anvil. That rack looks quite good to me. I think that will be quite usable, and I intend to put it in the camera and make sure that it moves freely. But that's quite a good result, because it certainly didn't look particularly promising to start with. But the main approach here is, well, the main thing to note really is that the last thing you want to do is attack that rack with a file. You're not trying to make pretty teeth, you're trying to push the metal back to where it came from. Now, brass is reasonably malleable, unless it's really mutilated. You can probably push the teeth back to the shape they once were. Of course, this rack had suffered because the support screw, the shoulder screw, was loose, and the whole top of the film advance shaft with its gear were able to move away from the racks. They weren't held in firm contact, and that's what had killed it. So when I put the camera back together, hopefully this rack will work fine. It certainly looks like it's worth a go to me.